for our webinar on building thinking classrooms. And hopefully you're all
Hey,
joining us
welcome.
this evening. Jenny, thanks so much for being here. How are you doing this evening?
I'm good. How are you, Patricia?
I'm awesome. I've been obviously doing a lot of summer reading with Peter's book, thinking
Yes.
about my own practice and what I can be changing for the upcoming school year. So a lot of
Yeah.
reflection, a lot of thinking about how that would look with my learners and what I might do or what I'm already doing that's working well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I
the
think it was
summer of
funny that
inquiry.
I know, a little shout out to my school district, Hillsborough County Public Schools in Florida, sitting at a training, getting this book from them. And I texted you, have you read this book? And you sent me a picture back. So I think that was so funny. Our brains were already there before we even thought of doing a little book review. So that's awesome. And it is good. It is reassuring to know that what you are practicing in the classroom is research based.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to be in with the way students are learning today and their learning styles. And then if you aren't doing it, then you can kind of see why there's such a shift in education. And I hope we kind of cover that up for everybody tonight, for those who are popping into us live or watching this stream later.
Absolutely. And definitely, everyone, if you're out there on the live stream, use the chat, ask your questions, let us know what you've tried, what you're wondering about. And we're going to go ahead and get started. We are recording, so feel free to come back and view it any time. But let's start with just kind of a quick introduction. And Jenny, you want to go ahead and get started?
Sure. My name is Jenny Geiford. I am a Hillsborough County Public Schools high school math coach. And a little shout out to my Sumner Stingrays. I'm not sure if any of my math peeps are watching this because I'm in Florida. So it is currently 3 hours ahead. So it's 10 o'clock at night right now. So they're probably not watching it live. I'm sure they're probably going to watch the stream, hopefully. And I am also a professor for a couple universities where I work with incoming teachers in the credential program and work with them on how to teach math and other things that can benefit and help them grow.
Thanks so much, Jenny. Yes, and my name's Patricia Dickinson. Again, I'm also in teacher education, and I've taught elementary and middle school math. And I was a coach for, just like you, Jenny, you're a math coach now,
Yeah.
a math coach for LA Unified, one of the biggest school districts in our country. And you can find me at Teacher Prep Tech if you're joining us on the YouTube channel. It's great to have you here as well. So let's go ahead and get started and start talking about building thinking classrooms.
Let's do it. All right. So this is a cool little shout out to, I see her name on there. She built this little thing I loved because
Laura Wheeler.
Yes, thank you. It was so small. But when I was researching better ways to engage students, because I think that's everyone's ultimate goal as a teacher is how do I get these kids to watch me? You know, you feel like you're doing this theater production every day, you know, standing up in front of the classrooms and jumping around and, you know, and doing all this hooping and hollering. And then you look at your audience and they're staring at their cell phones. You're like, well, that's anticlimactic. So, you want to get those kids engaged. So I started thinking about how to rework and reframe my classroom. And I found this and I thought this was awesome. And it really I like the sketchnoting part of it because it's easy to follow. It's not so much reading, So I was like, I zoned in on it. I love this. So it really talks about that flow that you want to be in. You don't want to be boring the class and you don't want frustrating the class. You want there to be this nice flow. And what I also noticed is in this book, Peter talks a lot about the flow of the classroom. And when you have good flow, then you can have good procedures. You can have good routines. You can have all that wonderful stuff. Things just work. And it is a challenge to get there sometimes. And I know the beginning of the school year is coming up. I know here in Florida, we start in August. Some places are even starting in the end of um, this month. So we have some people who might be going back to school right away. Really think about how you want your class to flow. And then once you have that, that's kind of like your middle piece, right? And then you want, well, how am I going to get there? And then how am I going to maintain it? Right? I mean, that's every teacher's thing. It's like, I love this, but like every thought that we have in teaching, I want to do this. Now, how am I going to do it? And how am I going to maintain it? So when you think of building this wonderful flow, I think a lot of it comes with building those relationships with your students too. And when the kids feel that you're there for them, they feel like you are rooting for them, you want this to be fun for them. And not saying that every day is going to be a party. That's not what we mean by fun. What we mean by fun is that the kids are engaged, they're asking questions, they're talking. That's fun. It doesn't have to be, this big, huge ordeal, because
Right.
that can become tiring. And then that stops being fun too. It's like having a birthday every day. The first week is awesome because you got 5 days of getting gifts. And then after that, you're like, okay, I'm done. It's something that doesn't need to come every day. But what you do need to bring every day, teachers, is your engagement. And your engagement is fun for the kids. When they're engaged, they're having fun. If you can get a teenager in high school to put down their cell phone and look at a math teacher, you won the day.
Right.
That's it, right? And
Yeah, I
you
mean,
can middle school too.
his process is all about getting the kids to think, to do, to engage,
Yeah,
right? It's that
right,
whole piece of engagement was so huge. And
right.
so, I mean, initially when I started my school year, I would always do my warm up,
Yeah,
and then I felt almost like a sergeant going up and down and checking, seeing who's working, who's not doing, who hasn't gotten started. And then, within the first 5-10 minutes, you've already got kids that are checked out.
yeah,
So even though I
yeah,
didn't read this book, and like all good teachers, it's like, well, I know I got to do something different, right? So I actually
right.
started every class period, because I was teaching 7th grade middle school, and I started every class period with a math game. So the kids
Yeah,
would come in and the games were already set up and they knew what to do. Of course, I had to give some directions if it was a brand new game, but it always involved dice. Kids were
yep,
sitting in groups, and so they were
yep,
talking right away. So that
right.
really helped me with this shift. But I like where Peter's going with, if you're going to build a thinking classroom, step one, you got to get them to think. That is so
Yeah.
critical.
And the way you get them to think is they have to understand that you trust them and they trust you. And that's that relationship that it's okay to think incorrectly sometimes. I may interpret a question differently than the person sitting next to me, and that's going to happen, right? So I think in this little, I don't know, what do we want to call this? Like a little book review, right? Of best teaching practices in a math classroom, whichever you want to call it. I hope that we kind of touch on that for you of, okay, all right, I'm going to listen to these ladies chat. And at the same time, I want you taking your notes and thinking of your classroom, what could you change? And it doesn't have to
Mhm.
be everything we present to you today. You can take it in by chunks and see how you can do just one of those things. And then once that works, you try something new. I never encourage any of my teachers, veteran or brand new, to revolutionize their whole entire classroom in one sweep, because
Right.
you will develop some sort of issue very quickly.
Yeah, I think I could see that causing a lot of anxiety. I know for
Yes.
me, one thing I'm gonna try is, I mean, I'm still gonna do the games because that worked really well, but I'm probably gonna start trying to begin with a problem and
Yeah.
getting and defronting the room more so that the
Yeah.
kids are up and moving. But we're
Yeah.
gonna talk about all these big ideas
All right,
from
let's get
Peter's
going.
book.
Let's do it.
So let's do it. And here's
All right.
another
Well,
great
this is one
visual.
of Peter's images from his book. It's his model here. I'm not going to read it verbatim here, but he's basically showing that flow of how it kind of intertwines, if you will, through
Mhm.
the different layers of his good teaching. Let's just call it that. I mean, we're all good teachers. We're all good teachers. What we're looking at is teaching, is how we deliver, how we implement, how we assess, right? And I think with being in education, I've been a teacher, as you know, Patricia, I've been a teacher for 21 years, all from California. All right, just moved out here. But
I got
in
21
21
years
years, I
too.
can say my teaching style has changed dramatically. I almost kind of want to go back to my first 5 years of teaching and apologize to those students.
Right.
I want to be like, oh my gosh, I was like not the nicest, I was not the best teacher. I was, because when you come out of the credential program, you think you have to be a certain way, and and you're afraid to try new things. And I hope we have some new teachers on here right now who are thinking, hey, you know what? I'm going to show up to this school. I'm going to do my jam. I'm going to do my own jam. I don't care
Absolutely.
what Susie next door is doing. I'm going to do my own thing. And I just didn't have those guts to do that. And I after about 5 years, I started going, this isn't working for me. This is not my learning style nor my teaching style, and we need to change it up. And that's what Peter's showing you here is when you go to change things, you want to look at these different elements of how it flows throughout your classroom.
All right, so let's talk about these 9 classroom evaluations. Here's the research behind the textbook, right? Because
Right.
Peter just didn't pop up these ideas and say, hey, these are great thoughts. He was visiting 40 classrooms at 40 different schools, looking at classrooms where there were English language learners, classrooms where there was public schools, private schools, high income,
Charter
low
school.
income.
Yeah.
You got it. And really thinking
And he
about,
did this over a course of many years. I mean, I think
right.
one of his documentations that I saw online, he started in 2015. So he's been doing this for several years and accumulating this data, and elementary, middle school, high school, you name it, like you said. And when he would walk into a classroom, he would look at these 9 things in the classroom. He wanted to see evidence of this being done. Are you going to see all of this at once? Maybe, maybe. Some of these can, be permanent fixtures, and some of these are fluid. Okay. But we're going to go through each of these 9. Now he has 14 principles. Am I right, Patricia? It was 14, right? Okay. So he's got those 14 principles, which Patricia and I can totally go into further detail on, but our little YouTube live here is not for that. We don't want to keep you on for all hours of the night. But what we did do is zone in on the things he looked for. And so
Exactly.
as coaches, Patricia and I will walk into classrooms and we want to see if any of these are being implemented. Okay. I mean, you're talking rock star teachers. Whoa, you're super cool if you have all 9.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so
But
even if you're observing too, a classroom as a student teacher, think about these 9 practices and what you're seeing, because what Peter found was that in every class, regardless of where the school was and what the student population, students were not thinking. You take a
yeah,
60-minute block period, and 20% of those students were thinking for 8 to 12 minutes.
yeah,
And that the remaining 80% of the students spent 0 minutes thinking. So really, he's delivering these strategies and these practices to get students thinking and really breaking through that institutional norm of teacher-directed student passivity classroom with math, because we know we're
right.
still struggling with high failure rates. We're still struggling with low self-efficacy and massive amounts of students' disengagement with math. And I know as
Yeah,
teachers of math, we're passionate about it, but we need to take a
right.
look at what we're doing and what we're not doing and how to make that shift.
And I think that shift comes from breaking from what we were taught.
Mm-hmm.
We as teachers often teach how we were taught. Well, times are different, my friends. Okay, when I went to high school, I didn't have a cell phone. I had a pager and a calling card. This was, we were cool if we designed little codes like 411 or, whatever. I forgot all the codes now, but we didn't have the distractions these kids have today. Plus, many of us did not have the burdens a lot of these kids have today. You
Right.
know, I have worked in low income, I've worked in high income. And I can tell you right away, a kid is a kid. They're all going to come with some sort of personal baggage, if you will, that they bring with them to the classroom. Having money or having no money does not make a child any different than another child. It's what they have experienced. And some of these kids have experienced quite a bit. So, and they probably were back in our day too, Patricia. I think it just wasn't as widely known to
Right.
educators. So we taught, we sat up at the board and we gave notes and we told them the test is on Friday and here's all your homework. You have to do at least 3 hours of homework a night, blah, 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 right? And that's how I started teaching. Like I said, I wish I can go back to my first few years as an educator and take those back and apologize to those kids. I mean, I still had a lot of kids who were performing really well, but as time went on, as my 21 years went on, I look at the kids I'm teaching today and the kids I was teaching 21 years ago. There's no way I could teach that same style. And that's education. It's constantly evolving, right? That's why
Exactly.
we have researchers like Peter and a whole bunch of other wonderful educator researchers out there who are putting these works to, you know, to a book and to workshops and practices and such. So the 9 tasks here, we're going to go through these real quick and kind of um, talk to you about what they are. And Dr. Dickinson is watching on live right
Yeah,
now.
we've
If you
got
guys
some
do have
questions.
questions, yeah, if you have those questions, go ahead and post them. Feel free to interrupt us.
We're going
If
to talk
you,
about the keep thinking questions.
yes,
But let's get started with just unpacking the kinds of tasks that Peter
yes,
talks about in the book, because this is kind of a big overarching piece of
right.
a good math program, right? Is asking good thinking questions. So, um,
Yes. And it's also getting that, like you said, getting that teacher off the whiteboard.
mhm,
Okay. And it's how do we stop direct instruction and how do we start giving the accountability and the learning portion of ownership to the student, and us as teachers are more monitors or coaches in the classroom. We're not teaching anymore, we're helping, we're monitoring, we're coaching them on. So this comes from Edutopia. They did a big research article on building thinking classrooms from Peter's book as well. So I am going to give them a shout out because some of the script here was taken from their article. And they're talking about students should begin with learning to problem solve.
mhm.
Okay, that's the biggest component of math. Here's a problem. How do we solve it? Right? And Peter says before you do that, in the efforts of building relationships with students, start with non curricular tasks. Give them something real world, something related to them. If
Right.
you see that you have some students who are gamers, like they're really big into, you know, Roblox or whatever, these games that they like, or Minecraft, and you ask them, how do you level up? Or how do you do this? They could sit there for hours and tell you all their skills on how to take care of a game or how they got to the next level, how they persevered and learned their tricks, right? You could also give them things like dots. He talked about like a dot chart and
Right.
just having dots. How many dots do you see? Which way did you count the dots? Did you go side to side? Did you go vertical? Did you make it into a shape? That's how you remember how many dots, whatever. Something that's not going to be tied into math per se.
Mhm. Number
Okay.
talk for grade or number talk visuals. I know, I can't remember the person's name, Exploding Dots. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of resources that are already out there, but I love what you said, Jenny, about it doesn't need to be grounded in your standards in the curriculum and the grade that you're at. It could be
Right.
anything real world that is going to get them to engage. And those
Right.
non-curricular tasks should happen within the first 3 to 5 minutes of kids starting the class, starting your math.
Right. This is great building, team building for the beginning of the school year. So teachers, we got the school year coming up. Can you believe it? Oh my gosh. But we got it coming up. So when you start thinking of your first week of school and how you're going to get to know those kids, instead of sitting there reading your syllabus, which sounds like Charlie Brown's teacher, you know, wah, 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 okay? Even when we read it to well, we don't read it to our college students, Patricia, thank goodness, but do any of them actually read it? No. So so believe me, we have that issue with the adults as well. Don't spend time with that stuff. Spend time getting to know your kids and how they think and how they perceive the world. Now, Patricia is going to chat with you about scripted circular tasks. What did you learn about that one?
Yeah, I mean, he gave, if you've read the book, he gave a wonderful example, which was the task of the tax collector, where
Yes, that
he
was a great
begins,
one.
yeah, he begins by asking a question that's based on students' prior knowledge. And
Yes,
so then he uses that to extend, right? Extend their thinking and get them to engage in a task that will allow them to work independently, right? So
right.
it's kind of like it's like riding a bike with training wheels, right? It's
Yes,
giving them a little bit of support, saying, yes, you can do this. Remember your prior knowledge and skills that you know, and then getting them to extend on that. So
right.
I think I did one last year. Was I found this, if you've played the game Prime Climb,
Yes,
and we were doing
yes,
factoring expressions, and I knew, my kids, based on my assessment data, that they probably would need to know some prior knowledge about, prime and composite numbers and factors of numbers and things like that, and multiples. So I went
mhm,
on the For the Love of Math site, and I found this wonderful visual of all the factors, and we looked for patterns, and we had a great discussion, and they got to color code all the factors and find the common multiples, and then
right.
like a launching point into the lesson on factoring expressions. So it was a great scripted curricular task. I actually got to see the kids feeling pretty efficacious about doing the math, and it was fun. And of course, it included coloring, which is fun too. It's a great visual.
Yeah, you get to add in that art piece. Kids like that.
Yeah, but I love the tax collector lesson too. I thought that was really good.
Yeah.
It's a good, juicy, scripted curricular task. And Jenny and I are
And
going to
it's great.
share.
It's great how he prompted that task too, because he didn't give the kids any idea that they were doing factoring.
Right.
It was
I
okay, pick
didn't
a
either in
number.
my
It was
test.
something as simple as pick a number. Any kid in your class can pick a number. Even if they say it in a different language, they can pick a number, right? So the kid would pick an envelope, and then inside that envelope would be another number, and they had to then take away those numbers, right? Well, later the kids start to realize the numbers that are in that envelope are factors of that number. And so they start seeing them being removed. Have you taught anything? I haven't taught anything, right? All of a sudden you'll have one kid go, oh, that number divides into that number. Bam, you're done. Now, if we had gone up and just told them, let's talk about division. Oh my gosh, that's
Right.
like everybody's favorite word, right? That and fractions.
Oh,
So
let's
that
not
brings
go
me
there.
to, right. And so that brings me to the curricular tasks. Now, one thing Peter did mention in his book that I felt I'm going to change in my classroom is he doesn't refer to things as assignments.
Mhm.
He feels that the word assignments has a connotation with grading. Here's an assignment. Oh, therefore I'm going to get a grade for it.
Right.
Well, and I think teachers do too, Patricia. I think teachers feel like if I give an assignment, I have to reward it with some sort of points or grade. And then the teacher winds up grading. And I used to be guilty of this. About 1,000 some papers a week, right? I mean, the grading becomes insane. So when you switch it to something like tasks or activity, it has a different feeling to the kids. Like, hey guys, all right, or I have this game. Let's play a game. Okay. Kids don't expect to get graded for a game. Kids don't expect to always get graded for an activity. But when they hear assignment, their mindset goes, oh, here's something I have to do so I can get some points and call it a
Right.
day. Right.
And
And
I
you wind up losing 60% of your class because they just go into that rut of here we go again. But if you can take these activities that you used in similar representations for the non-curricular, for your scripted, now take your curriculum, now take your standard material and make it a thinking task.
Mhm.
And we'll kind of talk about that. But he wants the kids to switch from I'm not getting graded for this. I'm learning from this. I'm learning to think from this, because when they start thinking, less questions come to us
Right.
of how to do it. They start asking different questions. And so let's move on to that.
Yeah, no, that's great. I was just, when you were talking, I was thinking out, I think maybe Desmos would be a good example
Oh yeah.
of a
Or
scripting.
GeoBra.
Yeah,
GeoBra too.
yeah,
Yeah.
those are just phenomenal, and the students love them. But typically, their structure is some prior knowledge based on, the particular skill that you want them to move towards, and it activates that. And then the students are more likely to to be okay with failure, right? Like
Yeah.
if they make a mistake, they're not just like, I'm done, I give up. If you were giving a regular word problem per se. And I used to always get teachers asking me, how do I teach word problem? You don't. You just get them. You have to get them to think, right?
Yeah.
And so that's another way. If you haven't checked out GeoGebra or Desmos, you can see the magic there about how those types of tasks really move students,
Yeah.
to get them to think.
And a lot of those programs have already built-in lessons that are free for teachers. Just jump on their site and grab some lessons already done. So let's talk about the how and way those teachers should give those tasks. We're not calling them assignments, but how should we give those? When is appropriate, and how do we deliver all that information? So one thing he mentioned was, as much as possible, tasks should be given verbally. He talked about pulling the kids out of their seats up to the front of the whiteboard, and they would stand around him in a crescent shape, and he would talk to the kids. Just talk, like, let's shoot some ideas out. How do you guys think about this? What do you see? What do you see? What do you see? And then he started to realize that kids were even grabbing markers and demonstrating their thinking right there on the whiteboard in front of all their peers. Do you think that kid would have walked up normally and done that? Probably not. Not many kids go, can I write on your whiteboard right now? Unless they're really in the moment, right? But he noticed that when kids are up and out of their desks, they're not on their phones.
Mm-hmm.
And if they are, it's very short and sweet, right? They're not distracted by other elements in the classroom, things like that. So he started to get them out of their seats. Now is a great time to talk about those tasks and giving that to them verbally. So, or pictures. So many of our kids are visual learners, especially in the world of mathematics. They need to see it. Like, what does it look like? So show them the data, show them diagrams, show them the long expressions,
Exactly.
things like that. So,
And I know Joe Bowler's doing a lot of work on the data science. And if you haven't checked out her site, there's already a bunch of data talks that you can use to have these types of conversations, right? Because we want to get our kids talking, because that's a sign that they're engaged.
Yes. Well, and I always tell my students, when you can teach it or talk about it, you know it. So let's talk about notebooks. Okay, so he did talk a bit about notebooks. So we're talking about tasks here. I know a lot of us teachers would use the students' notebooks
so guilty of this.
to do tasks in, right? And that's fine if students need a place to write their work and record their work. But he noticed that a lot of classrooms he walked into were typical classrooms of the, I want to say 80s, 90s, okay, maybe even earlier in that, of the classrooms in rows, everybody's facing the front, the teacher's writing the notes, the kids are copying the notes. Maybe the kid understands what the notes are, maybe they don't. But they're writing it down. And he said this is a mindless activity that has no data. Nothing comes from just writing these notebooks down. And I am 100%, Patricia, guilty of this.
Me
now,
too.
I stopped doing it. Yeah, right? I stopped doing it because I was frustrating myself trying to make notes memorable for kids. And I was trying different ways of presenting the notes and all this sort of stuff. But I would go up to a student and say, they would call me over. I don't know how to do this. Well, it's in your notes. Let's find it in your notes.
Right.
Oh, I wasn't here that day. Or I didn't write it down. Or I lost my notebook. And so as we evolve as educators, we try to find better ways of doing things. So I actually presented a couple of years ago at a CUE conference, the one in Palm Springs, where I demonstrated to a room full of educators how to use interactive notebooks, but digitally. When I was able to go digital, now I had the benefit of a classroom in California where we were one-to-one iPads and tablets, depending on which we had access to that day. Um, and I realized, you know what, the kids need to take ownership of these notebooks. And so I started to do them digitally, where I was asking them to challenge their own thinking, reflect on what they learned that day. Instead of me telling them, here's the vocab, here's an example, here's this. Now I'm going to say I was guilty of this last year, just because I moved to a different state and I was trying to fill in a spot. These poor kids had no instruction for several months because of the teacher shortage, as we all know.
Right.
And I was kind of thrown into a situation of, I got to get these kids to understand this quickly. And I went to my old school route, and I was like, okay, panic mode set in, right? I can't ask a bunch of kids to challenge their thinking when it's December and they just met me. It's
you were trying to fill in the gaps. I got
we were
you.
filling in the gaps. Yeah, I was just trying to like, oh my gosh, you guys have been missing 4 months of education, right? So with last year aside, I went digital with my notebooks. And what I would ask them to do is we would do a lesson. And I'm really big on math stations, which Patricia and I have done a YouTube video on that. Check it out. Where we talked about, give a little shout out to our other PD. Where we talked about math stations and how to differentiate, but I won't talk about that today. But in my math stations, they would all work. And then before they left, they had to give me some sort of reflection, challenge their thinking. What did you learn? I would also ask them to go home and research images or YouTube videos or any videos from anywhere, because, they're all over the place now. That was an example of what we learned that day or what they worked on that day. And then they got a chance to publish their own notebook, and having it be live, they could make it fluid. They can go take things out and they didn't have to worry about it messing things up. And I wasn't dealing with the lost notebook anymore. I wasn't dealing with the sticky notebook, which I'm not real sure why some of them ever stuck together. I didn't find out. The pages were stuck. I just let it go. But they got to use them on informal assessments. They were showing the possibilities. It showed the students learning. It was like a portfolio of their learning. So back to school, not back to school night. What's the second one? Oh, no, it is back to school night or open house.
Back to school.
Open house. All I know is I had to show up. I'd have their notebooks out. And I'm like, look at your child's learning. Here's the beginning of the school year. And one notebook of 100 pages in paper form held me the whole year, right? Well, these kids were putting out notebooks on, we had the computers now, right? So they can see the digital computers. We're talking like 200 pages, 200 slides.
Wow.
Of filled out material that these kids would go back and do. And then I even had them record themselves teaching their own lesson.
That's awesome. I mean, that's a great way to kind of ditch the paper teacher notes. And as Peter talked about, is it needs to be student created. They need to have ownership. And so your approach to creating it, making it interactive, I always did the table of contents in the paper notebook and they were just a hot mess and I got frustrated looking at them. Right. But you presented in a way where they could collaborate, they could make it interactive, they could hyperlink to, good videos or things that they found, and they can own it.
Or they they would even take pictures, like you said, they're working with groups, right? They would take pictures of their work and boom, boom, boom. A lot of the kids had the app right on their phone, right? And they would upload that image right into their notebook, and that was their proof for that day. So then they had their image, and then they would reflect on what that image was showing. And things like that, they, if it was on paper, they'd have to print it and then tape it in there, and it was a big mess. And so he talks about that too.
It's a waste of class time.
It is, and it's a waste of teacher time. Mm-hmm. I'm all about making things easier for the teacher, but also efficient. We don't want to be easy for the teacher, but the children are suffering. That's not okay. But here's an example of one of my students' notes. This was their reflection. We were talking about parallelograms and stuff, but you will see right next to it, they have worked out the assignment with their group. And then they went through and reflected, this particular student reflected on each question that they had to complete. And this is handwritten. However, what she did is she likes the lines. She didn't want to type.
Right.
So she did it on a piece of paper, took a picture of her paper, and uploaded that to her digital notebook.
Awesome. And so this would be example, as Peter talked about, having those multiple tasks, throughout, so that they're continuously working on a task after a task. And then they're reflecting, writing maybe a note to themselves, reflecting, and that way they can reference that so they know what they did, how they did it,
Right.
and what they learned.
Right. And I even like this one. If you look at B at the bottom, it says B is the difference of the two heights. Like wrote herself a note, like difference is the actual of subtraction.
Right.
That
Nice.
yeah. So went back and used the words that were used in the question.
So I think not using this as an evaluative tool, which I have been guilty of using
Oh yeah,
notebook.
me too. Me too.
But
I
using
graded
it
them
as
for
a
years.
tool. Using it
Yeah.
as a tool for students to help them learn, to help them reflect, because Peter talks about really, which I love, those soft skills like grit, perseverance, self-reflection,
Yeah.
the soft skills that are really, when you think about it, going to get your students to persevere in mathematics. Because
Right.
if your kids have that mindset where it's fixed, they're not going to persevere through a challenging task.
Right. Right.
So
But
let's
they
talk
will on
about
something they're
group.
engaged in, they will. So let's talk about groups. There's different types of groups that Peter mentions. And this image here is talking about strategic grouping, where you're looking at the educational versus the social. You're looking at how productive this group would be if I arrange them. Now we all do this as educators. I am not putting that friend with that friend. Like Patricia and I probably wouldn't be in the same group together because we chat the whole time, right? But what kind of chat are we doing, Patricia? Well, if we're engaged, we're going to chat about the assignment. Okay,
Exactly.
even though her and I are friends, and we have this, friendship that we love to chat, and we're just kind of those kind of people. If we were always purposely separated, then you may never see our potential to work together. So I actually did this year with my a couple high school students of mine. Oh, they talked all the time. I had them on separate ends of the room and they still chatted. It was continuous. I finally said, all right, I'm going to put them next to each other on the seating chart, right? Well, I didn't tell them that. They came in. I had a new seating chart because it was time to change it up. And his name was Chris. And he walks up to me, goes, hey, Miss G, I'm sitting next to Eduardo. And I said, I know. He goes, but we're friends. I said, I know. He goes, oh, so you know we're together? I said, buddy, I put you there. And he was like, oh, okay. And I said, but I'm going to trust that you're going to get your work done and you're not going to interrupt class. And he was like, yeah. And can I tell you, Patricia, they were great. I think
awesome.
because I allowed them the chance to show me what they need.
Absolutely. And it all comes back to relationships and knowing, and the kids knowing that you trust them. I love his strategy of using the visibly random groups with the cards.
Yes.
And
I
doing
like
that
the deck
in front
of
of
cards.
the kids, because he talked a lot about like just doing random groups, which I've done, and said, oh, I'm going to have you work with these groups today. And the kids know, they pick up on it, but when they see it and they know it's random, what he found was they're more likely to kind of move through those stereotypes or beliefs they have about each other as well.
Right. If they start to see like, she keeps saying it's random, but I'm always sitting next to this person. They start to realize random does not work that well. They start to be really good at problems and probability and statistics, right? But I liked his, he would stand at the door. He said teachers would stand at the door and fan out a deck of cards, and the kids would grab a card. And let's say it was the ace of spades or whatever, right? They would go and find that table group for the number and then the ace of spades seat. So they had this, like, they chose their own fate. One of the things because I'm techie. So one of the things I like to use was Flippity,
Mm,
flippity.net. It's
right.
free. You upload your names in an Excel spreadsheet. And it's kind of like, if you've ever been at one of those conferences, Patricia, where the thing is spinning around and you're watching all the names go by. And then you're like, is it my name? Is it my name? Because you're wanting to win something.
Right.
It's that type of thing, and you can change it up. You can make it different each time. But they sit there and watch, and then every time the person's name gets chosen, you click on it, and that person's name is taken out of the
Oh,
random
nice.
order. So they start to see it dwindling down. And he also mentioned that even kids who were coming to class tardy for whatever reason, they could still have a chance to pick their group, because you still had cards available for them. So obviously there's seats still available, but you weren't just saying like, oh, you're late, go sit at that desk.
Right.
They still had a choice. So it eliminates those social barriers. Like you mentioned, they stop kind of stereotyping themselves and,
Mhm.
oh, I'm with the smart group, or I'm with this kid,
Right, which
things like
leads to disengagement.
that. Right. Right. And it also breaks down those seating charts. Like, I'm not always at this seat. Now, in my classroom, in my former classrooms, I stopped doing seating charts because I started to have them work in groups every period.
Right.
So they just walked in and put their backpacks down along the side of the room and went to the group that they were assigned.
Yeah,
So
I was
there was so
stoked to
much
read that
movement.
3 was the magic number. I was like, "All right, at least I got something right last year because I always grouped them in 3." So, I think
Right.
some things are just intuitive.
Very good. Yeah, exactly. So
Who
this
found it
comes from
funny too, it was
Edutopia. They said
yeah.
Edutopia mentioned how groups frequently, for the purposes of both extending their work and getting help, they were able to like look around and see what other groups were doing. The teachers would kind of train the kids that they were not the first person to ask questions to, which I know a lot of teachers, we do this ask three before me kind of thing.
Right.
But they got into going, hey, next group, what did you guys get? Did you guys also get this? And that talking, even if they don't know what they're really asking the other group, how that other group responds kind of prompts that conversation to keep going, and the other group's not going to just say, oh, we got 5, just put down 5. Well, I need to know how you got 5, because we need to know how you did that so we can do the next question, something like that. So but yeah, I thought that was really good. But it really encourages that interaction between those students, and especially those ones who are stuck and need that extension of help. And it's not coming from us, it's coming from their peers, and their peers are going to
Exactly.
speak that common language.
Yeah, I used to do a lot of carousel activities in my class, and then
Yeah,
they would go around with Post-its and ask questions or extend each other's thinking and creating that interactive space, where they're helping each other,
right.
which also, it creates a different classroom climate, right? When they're
Yeah.
collaborating and connecting with each other as well.
And they're also not afraid to be wrong, because they know that if they are wrong, there's someone there that's going to kind of re-guide them, or redirect them. And then we learn from our failures. I don't know where that became such a stigma of badness. Like, I
Right.
always tell kids, when you started learning how to walk, your butt fell down a few times, I can guarantee it. You will. I
I
mean, my
love
two
it.
kids, they didn't just pick up and start running. It was a lot of
Exactly.
that top heavy,
And they all
stuff.
walked at different times too, which is, just kind of where they're at in the classroom too. I think so often they look to their peers for validation, and they see their peers perhaps being able to do something with ease,
Right.
knowing what
Yep.
happened, what grit and hard work they had to put into that, and then they start judging themselves. So
Right. Exactly. Well, like I mentioned, I stopped doing seating charts because I started to do workspaces, and he calls them VPNSs,
that's
vertical
right.
non-permanent surfaces, right? Mine was exactly that. Okay. I went out one year and my husband and I bought shower board, and we cut them into pretty good sized squares, because you have some tall students, you have some short students, you need to have a good, median for everybody. And I posted them all the way around my room.
Wow.
Now, this idea comes from my buddy. I got to give him a shout out, Ed Campos. He's a
Oh yeah.
uh, oh yeah, you know, he's a big math guy in California. Amazing educator. He does lots of PD as well. And I went to his PD at the Q conference, and he talked about 360 math. If you Google 360 math, I'm sure you'll see Ed Campos pop up. And he had us up out of our seats in this conference of all these teachers, exactly that picture right there almost, right? Where we're
Right.
all walking around the room, and we had to pair up with groups of 3 or 4, if, you know, because it's a conference. And we had to work out some, you know, little silly problem that was on the board, right? And we would sit there and we talk about it and stuff. But because we were up out of our seats, we were instantly a little bit more engaged, because now it's
The blood's
abnormal
flowing.
to be standing around all day in your classroom, right? That's not the norm anymore. It's like I come in, I sit down, you know, and they need to be moving. And so the kids started producing, you know, this kind of thinking, just having them up out of the room when I was teaching, you know, or when I was explaining. But when you physically look around the room, I started to teach from the center of the room, where I could stand there and I could look all the way around the room and go, yes, no, try again. Oh, I love that. Or I'd walk over, and like one thing Peter said is my kids all used black expo markers. One, because they were the easiest to erase. Colored sometimes is a little harder on those shower boards.
Right.
But I would walk around with a blue or a red or whatever, you know. He does mention to stick to one color every time.
Right. And the
So that's
teacher
something
has
I'm
a
going to try.
different color.
Yeah, I was trying different colors all the time. But he says when the teacher uses the same color, the kids notice that was the teacher's writing, not some other kid's writing. But when you see a group that needs an extension or needs that kind of little helping hand, if you walk over in with your color, give them that help, other groups will turn and look and go, oh, look, Miss G just wrote down
Right.
da, 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 da. Okay, oh, now we get it. And they start getting help without really asking for it, because they're looking around the room to see where is this going. And you can see even with little kids, they're going to do this. They're going to, you know, like this little kid in the Vans sweatshirt, he's completely looking at somebody else's board. You know,
Yeah.
he's like, what are you guys doing? You know, I want to see what you're doing too. So,
At
but
least he's able to go back and tell them what to do.
right, right. And this is, and you know, even if they're not strong in math, they can look around a room and relay information. Like, hey,
Mhm.
hey, you know, Patricia just wrote down the 12. Uh, oh, we must be doing multiples, or we must, oh, that's what we're doing. You know, even if we were wrong, then they might look at another group and go, okay, don't look at their group anymore. Let's look over here. But they're researching, they're trying to find a way, rather than sitting at their desk going, I don't get it. I'm not doing it. I don't get it. You know, and giving up. Give them a lifeline. And he calls this defronting the classroom, which means there is no front anymore.
Mhm.
Okay. There, you know, even if you don't have whiteboards like I did. And by the way, that cost me $200, Patricia. That was it.
Wow.
For like 20 some whiteboards around my room. It was amazing. My husband came in and drilled them in. And when I left California, the wonderful teacher who got my classroom was very happy. So, because I was like, am I taking these down? They're like, leave them up. Let the next teacher use them. I was like, all right, sounds good. And if you don't have the ability to do that, then what that last image you were showing, they had like those big notebook papers and things like that.
Right. The whiteboard.
Yeah.
White book.
A white book.
Yeah.
Yeah. But even if
And
that, just take butcher paper and put it up and things like that. But these are great. And then he also mentioned to always
or
have,
windows. They talked about using the window.
yeah, or, you know, some kind of, I used to use the black expo marker on our desks, because a lot of
Right.
our desks nowadays have like a gloss finish to them. Like if they're really shiny, always check it out first before you do it. But you can have them right on the desk, but just don't have them sitting in the chairs so much. You know, try to get them out of those seats, because once that butt hits the chair for some reason, the brain stops working.
Right.
There's like a brain butt thing. Now, this is my
The
classroom.
brain
There's my
butt.
whiteboards. And now they're sitting in chairs. Go figure. But I'll tell you why in a second here. But you'll see all their work around the rooms there. What they were doing was they had to work on these laptops. So I didn't want them standing holding a laptop and trying to work on it, because that's too much. So on this particular one, I said, all right, you guys can sit. But they had to show their work up on the whiteboards. So you'll see there even on my table, I'm like, all right, table 3, this is what you guys are working on here. This is part of my math stations that we talked about in our last PD. And they would read the instructions, which is in the center bucket there. They would go together, but you see it's one laptop for 2 kids. They all had to still collaborate, but they had to get up and show their learning up on the board. And so
Awesome. So
yeah,
two birds with one stone. And I think he also talked about if there are working groups of 3, you just give one marker so that they have
right.
to collaborate and share and talk. And then if you notice someone's not participating, you just can give that person the marker to encourage them to engage with the task as well.
Right. You know what I also did too? I gave each kid, like the expo markers sometimes come with like a red, a green, a blue, a purple, whatever, right? Each kid got a different color. And I'm like, you can't sit down until I see all colors on the whiteboard.
Oh, that's cool. I like
So
that.
even if the kid who's holding purple and has no clue what they're doing, now they're forced to ask their friends, what do I need to write? Tell me. Oh, and I also told them they couldn't write their own work.
Right.
They had to turn and write someone else's ideas. So I would turn and go, hey, Freddie, what do I write? What's my next step? And he would sit there and dictate to me, all right, you're going to subtract here. You're going to borrow from here. You're going to distribute here. And I would be sitting there writing what he says. Right. So there's so many ways you can change this up, but
no, I love that. Because I find that when I gave them all whiteboards and all markers, one person, just like he was doing the math, and the other ones were coloring on their whiteboards or drawing pictures on their whiteboards. I'm like, wait, this isn't what we're supposed to be doing.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So let's talk about questions. I found this quote really interesting about the number of questions a teacher asks, between 200 and 400 questions a day. That's just amazing.
They say that teachers make more split decisions than a neurosurgeon.
What?
Yeah. Since lots of studies have come out that teachers, we are making more on-the-spot decisions, instant decisions, or answers to questions at a faster rate as well than a neurosurgeon does during brain surgery.
Wow.
And that's because we have been programmed to answer every question.
That's right. And Peter says, don't do that. So let's talk about the kinds of questions.
Let's talk about that. So we have proximity questions, stop thinking questions, and keep thinking questions. Well, I think we can all guess which one's the winner, right? Well, they are exactly what they say right there in that little script I gave you. So let's talk about each one individually.
Great. And I think Lou had a question about if you can give an example, Jenny, of a keep thinking question.
Ooh. All right, I will. All right, let's go ahead and hit the next slide for me, and we'll go to proximity. So I would say when I taught elementary, this was my death of me, because those little cute hands go raising up in the air, and they, Miss, can you help me? And they're so cute, and they do the little cute eyes and everything, and you're just so excited they raise their hand and ask you anything. We answer them right away. Why? Because we're in proximity of them. We are walking around the room. We're looking for understanding. We're also monitoring behavior, because especially with your littles, you have somebody who's going to be off task. Even with high schoolers, you still do. And they need those redirections, right? Well, that hand goes up because you're standing right there, or they'll tug on your shirt, or they'll tap you on the leg, which was my ultimate pet peeve. And am I doing this right? Or how am I doing? And they would ask you for the sake of getting an answer.
Right. And they want your attention. Just like my bunny, he was nudging at my foot, so I picked him up. He was in my proximity.
Right? You're like, hey, where'd you go? All right, let's try the next one there. So what could we do differently? So I try to give you a little bit example here. Instead of proximity, You could walk over if they are pointing at something and going, am I doing this right? And you go, isn't that interesting? Can you find something else that would also get you that answer? Or can you show me how you did that? Can you write down your steps? Is that answer always going to be true? Is there a chance in math that that answer could be something different? Could it have multiple answers?
Right.
And sometimes, what do you think it is? Is this right? I don't know. What do you think? Is it? And just walk away. Just walk away. So answer their question with a question.
There you
and
go.
walk away.
Get
And
some
leave
keep
them
thinking.
kind of stunned. And they're going to think, oh, she's so mean. She won't answer my question. No, I'm not mean, honey. I'm trying to prepare you for life. And in life, you're not going to walk up to your boss every 5 minutes and going, am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? You are going to have to stop, look at what you're doing, and run through the possibilities that it could be wrong. And if it is wrong, what are you going to do about it? Right? We can't always go to our authority figures of some sort and ask those questions. In the real world, we have to learn to think on our own. And that's what Peter's trying to get, is these kids to think. All right. So stop thinking questions. You want to chat about this one? Stop thinking questions.
Sure. Yeah. So these are the questions that obviously you read. They take the form of, do we have to learn this? These
Right.
are paralyzing questions. And, we want to just walk away from these types of questions because they stop students from thinking. And we want to break that habit. I think these are kind of like habitual questions that students have learned to get that response from teachers that we typically don't want to respond to. So we have to be just mindful of these types of questions and not let them get us off track as well,
Right.
in terms of getting our students to think and to persevere in a challenging task.
And I think these are the ones where the kids realize it got hard, and now they want to give up. They want to take the easy road. They're tired for whatever reason, So let's replace it with what sounds good.
Yeah. I mean, does that make sense? That's a good one.
That's, sometimes when you, especially with the littles, when you say like, let's start with something basic, right? To my kindergarten teachers, when they come up to you and say, that's a triangle and it's clearly a square, and go, does that make sense?
Right. There you go. That's
a
good
example. Are you sure? Are you sure?
Can you prove it?
Yeah.
How do you know?
Right. And then with your high school students, I always use the bet thing. You want to bet $100?
Oh, there you go.
Oh, I'm like, would you bet $100 on your answer? Hands down right now. Let's do it. And they're like, well, I don't have the money. That's okay. I'll bill your parents. What do you got? And it's just kind of joking with them, and letting them know like, hey, would you put everything on the line for that answer? And if there's any doubt in you right now, let's look at it until you are 100% confident. That's the answer.
There you go. And let's talk about those keep thinking questions. I mean, these are pretty much those questions that keep students thinking, right?
Right. So this is going to our question, the question we got online, right?
Yeah. Do you want to provide an example? Let's say I'm working on factoring equations and I'm struggling. I don't know how to do it. Doesn't make sense.
Well, I would ask them, one thing about factoring is being also able to use a manipulative of some sort. So if they are taught the thinking process first, okay, so when we talk about getting kids to think and we're giving them that thinking task, and then now we're involved in like the lesson and the curriculum, right? Handing them back those movable manipulatives and letting them see how you can take a whole and factor it into little pieces, right? And so when they start learning to factor out equations or expressions, they can realize that, oh, well, 6 can be broken down into 2 in 3 times, or 3 in 2 times. Oh, okay. So I need a 3. Okay, because I'm looking for two things that when I multiply them, add to this, they add to 5, but they factor 2 or they multiply to a 6, right? So they start seeing that number sense. And by handing them those manipulatives. So to get them to keep thinking is by asking them those questions to them that I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head and I'm drawing a blank because I'm talking at the same time. But you want to engage them with this at hand. And a lot of times they're asking for clarification. So let me first start there. These types of questions that are coming to you are coming to you from kids who are already thinking. They're asking you for refining it. You know, because their brain's going big, kind of like mine right now, where I'm trying to think of an example and talk at the same time. Their brain's going big and they're asking you to narrow it down for them. So they might say something like, does a positive and then a negative, does that mean we're going to be adding two numbers that then multiply to this? Or is that mean I'm going to be subtracting those two numbers that then multiply to this? When they're talking about factoring out those polynomials. And that's a clarifying question. These kids are thinking, and they're providing you proof that they're thinking. So let's take it to a little person's perspective, long division, right? Or any division, to be honest, doesn't even have to be long. If you're asking them, 3 goes into 14, and they know that 3 times something is not 14. They know their 3's times tables. Maybe they have their chart next to them. They may ask you, does it have to go into it evenly? And then you would say, well, can you show me proof that 3 can go into 14 evenly? Well, it's not on my multiplication chart. Okay, there's your proof. If it's not there, then you're talking that you're probably going to have a remainder or a decimal or however, or a fractional answer at the end, depending on what age level you're working with. That's that keep thinking question, is they're trying to figure out if they're thinking in the right direction. And then students will ask those in order to be motivated to keep going and go, show me proof. And then the kids show you proof and be like, there you go. What were you thinking? Why did you ask that question? And they're like, well, because it's not on my multiplication chart. So I figured it wasn't going in. All right, so you were already thinking about that. Keep going. Keep going. Take it to the next level. What do you do if it doesn't fall there? Oh, and then they're off and running. But you're not going, well, honey, you're going to bring this down. You're going to find the number closest to 14, and then you're going to subtract, and then you got a remainder. You just stopped their thinking. You stopped their thinking, because as teachers, we want so much just to help them, but our help sometimes can handicap the child too, where they become so reliant on us as educators that that's where their thinking stops. And then when we get students up at the high school level, they're just so used to being spoon-fed that they just show me the answer, or what's the formula, or can you just give us a worksheet and let's just do the worksheet because I'm done with this, you know?
Because it's familiar too. I mean, they've gotten into a routine of not thinking and knowing that there's, you know, a formula, or eventually I remember teaching dividing fractions one year, and I was using the illustrative math program. And so you teach it conceptually first, and then eventually they learn the algorithm, keep, change, flip.
Right.
And when they got to that, they were frustrated at me. They were like, well, why didn't you just show us that in the first place? I'm like, because then you wouldn't have understand. You wouldn't have any understanding.
Right. And that's why, you know, in the universities, Patricia, we teach our students CRA model.
Right.
But I kind of wish they didn't call it CRA model, because a lot of times I start with the abstract, or I start with the representation to hook them in. The representation could be, because it goes concrete, representational, abstract, but sometimes we can start with the representational. We can start with the manipulatives. We can start with the pictures. We can start with the diagrams, and then learn the concrete, and then learn the abstract. You know, I like
the 5 representations.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be taught in the same order, you know. And I think teachers think my lesson plans have to be this way. No, lesson plans are fluid. They should be changeable. You're never going to have a perfect lesson plan your first shot. And if you are, you better be a 50-year veteran teacher, because I'm 21 and I haven't written a perfect lesson plan right off the start. It's something we constantly go back and critique, and a lot of that is learning how to stop helping.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
that doesn't mean don't. Yeah, and that doesn't mean don't take it this way, because I've worked with teachers who mean like, so you mean I just sit back and do nothing? No, no, no. You're monitoring, you're coaching, you're cheering them on. Or sometimes what I'll do is, if I'm not going to say anything, but I'll walk over and tap on their paper and kind of look at them kind of sideways, and they're like, oh, we messed up somewhere. Hold on. And I'll just kind of like bring their attention to something, or I'll wink and smile like, there you go. You got it. You got it. But I'm not saying no words, but I'm giving them little bits of hints or affirmations to let them keep going. I'm keeping that motivation going.
Now, and then this kind of piggybacks on the idea, what Lisa was asking about, what advice would you give? I might say, rather, for coaches, is to have them think about those kinds of questions, that, because I think as teachers, we've become so routine in just giving our students the answers. But perhaps when they're planning a task, select your task, think about the different ways students can solve the task. I always go, when I select a task, I work through the task and I solve the task in different ways. But then I also think about, what questions should I be asking while my students are going through the task, because this is their first time learning this concept or skill.
Right.
And how can I use those questions to help them to keep thinking? Right.
And I think you're right, is it comes down to your planning. It comes down to your prep. And, every day I plan, every day I prep. You should never feel like you can walk in and wing it, because when you're winging your education, you're winging your test scores. I'm going to tell you that right now. Okay. You're letting those kids down. So when you prep and you plan and you're thinking ahead of the game, now, of course, some kid's going to ask you a question you're not ready for, but you're going to be more ready to have a comeback of a keep thinking answer, right? Than just, figuring it out for them and showing them that formula that they want to see, or why didn't you just show us that in the first place? Or when are we ever going to use this, right? I mean, and I always tell my students, I don't teach you anything you can Google.
There you go.
Right? Get them to do their own research. And sometimes they'll ask you, Miss G, how do I factor this quadratic? And I'm like, Google it. And they're like, I can? Isn't that cheating? You're researching.
I love
because
that.
When you pull up Google, as we know, you're not gonna, the very first thing you Google is not your best answer. Right? Sometimes Google just picks up on words. It doesn't really know what you're saying. So then the kids have to infer what that particular article or example is showing. Is that what we're learning? Because they could just write it down, but that has nothing to do with quadratics. So they have to have that prior knowledge of what a quadratic is, what it looks like, how to solve it. So when they're looking at an example online, they're like, yeah, that's what I'm learning right there. Let me write that down. Or finding
and that
a YouTube
ties back
video.
to the idea of note taking, like, because it's
Exactly.
personalized. I remember showing math antics videos because I thought they were very cool, but my students were bored to tears with them. So you remember that?
Yes, yes. So here's some things you could also think of as types of student questions you'll get for keep thinking. Okay, so more examples to our friends online asking questions is, can we get to the next one? They're ready to move on.
Right.
The kids are like, okay, can we go to the next one? Can we go? Yeah, move on. Right? Every kid learns at a different pace. When you say numbers that add to 25, do you have to stick with whole numbers? I don't know. You tell me. Why don't you try it? I'll come check on you.
There you go.
And then I always like this one is, we want to try to solve this for the negative case as well. Is that okay? What teacher is going to be like, nah, just positive. I mean, holy cow, this kid wants to do extra work. Yes. And it's not work. These are kids who are having fun, right? A lot of times when I tell teachers, you need to have, sorry, my dog went all crazy all of a sudden. When we tell teachers to bring the fun into the classroom, they really think like, I gotta, act silly and goofy. No, that's embarrassing.
That could get you on YouTube and you could lose your job. I've seen that.
Yeah, let's not get you fired, okay? Bring the fun means bring the engagement.
Right.
Make it fun. Kind of like when we go to conferences, right? When you're sitting there and you're like, this is cool. All right, cool. I'm going to listen to this guy. He's got motive. He's got something talking about that I'm interested in. He's asking us questions. I'm doing this. Oh man, he's going to, I'm in, right? And then I might walk to the next session and it's not really relative to me. The presenter didn't hook me in, isn't animated, and I'm already looking on Facebook. Or I'm already texting. I'm texting you, Patricia, going, "Hey, girl, what you doing?" I mean, that's where we go. I mean, we are our worst students at times, especially like in staff meetings and PDs, right? Because if it's not relevant to us, which the math department is notorious for, because so many of those PDs out there are geared toward language arts. The math department's like, that sounds great for y'all, but I can't use that in my classroom because I don't teach capitalization and punctuation and all this other stuff and revising we don't write like that in math. Our math is reflective, right? So I'm not asking them to write a thesis paper. I don't want to read that much. That's why I chose to teach math,
But I think we can say that this type of approach is almost similar to how our colleagues in science approach teaching science, right? It's very inquiry based,
right?
It's
scientific method.
Scientific method, so just put on your researcher hat and let your kids become scientists in the classroom and proving things, and that will give them ownership. And Peter talks a lot about that autonomy and ownership and, fostering independence, again, the soft skills that we want to build into our math program so that kids are not just excited about doing the math, but they're confident, right?
Yeah. And they're prepared for the real world.
Exactly. Yeah. The real world too. So I think these practices also lend itself to growth mindset.
Yeah.
Which, maybe 5 or 6 years ago when it came out, us math gurus were just like, I love this growth mindset. This is great. I'm going to show this PowerPoint on the brain and the research and, but there was no pedagogy to go along with it.
Yeah.
And now we have
or we had trouble as teachers keeping that going.
Right.
We're like, it's okay to make mistakes. And then you're marking them wrong for it.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you got an F on that paper. Wait, I thought you said it was okay to make mistakes. Well, let's bring some clarity and transparency for our students. So let's talk about that teacher feedback, right? Giving those hints and giving those extensions are okay. You can use those, but when to use them. You don't want to stop their thinking, like we mentioned earlier. You don't want to stop their thinking, but what you want to do is maintain that engagement. But if you do see students that need more time, you see students who are struggling a little bit and they can look around and get kind of an extended helping hand, right? But you want to maintain that flow, like Peter says. You want to stay in that flow zone, okay? I have his little diagram on that first couple slides we showed you. And you can Google that picture. I stole it off the internet. It's up there. It's not mine. But you'll notice that flow kind of goes right up that I want to say coordinate plane because we're math people, right? Above it's a challenge where this is too hard. Okay, they're going to give up because they're going to think you're crazy. That's like teaching calculus to an Algebra 1 student. They're going to be like, what the heck is that? Right? Woo! You jumped the gun. You're a little too high. But at the same time, you don't want to take that Algebra 1 class and be teaching them 5th grade math. They're going to be like, This is boring.
Right.
Okay. You want to maintain that engagement. And it's that balance of keeping things right in there. Just touch the challenge, just touch the boredom a little bit, because some days are going to be better than others. And that's how that's going to kind of help. And that teacher feedback of how you give feedback. Are you giving affirmations? Are you giving little winks and nods? Are you walking over and giving a little check mark on their paper, a little smiley face, like you notice?
I use lots of
Um,
stamps. Stamps
yes,
and stickers.
stamps. Yeah, and he also mentioned in his book, by having kids turn and go, you need to show that to the class. And
Right.
the whole group that they're working with, so it's not just poor kid being singled out, right? The whole group gets up and demonstrates their learning. And then they call on another group and they're like, all right, your turn. Tell us what you guys did. Your turn. Tell us what you guys did. Until every group has presented a 1 minute, recall of what they worked on. And
Exactly. That's such
that's
a
better
good way to
feedback.
build their confidence. And I just want to add that like those extension pieces can also be developed during your planning, right?
Yeah.
Because going in the classroom, you're going to have kids working at different levels or
Yes.
they come in where they're at. So we want to provide thinking about those hints that we can
That
provide, as
support.
well as how we can extend it for those kids that are ready for more.
Right, because you have your ELL students, you have your students who with learning deficits. You have students who also maybe have just never been well rehearsed because they've moved around so much. They don't have that foundation under them. Maybe they
Right.
moved from a different country and they were learning something completely different.
I had a lot of kids
You never know.
homeschooled last year. That was whoa.
Yeah,
That was a
yeah, or
challenge.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then you have no
exactly.
data on them.
Or
But
maybe they were misplaced. Maybe they were misplaced. You're teaching an honors class and this kid should not be in honors. And hey, like it or not, the kids in your class, you got to work with them. You can't just forget the
right.
kid because they were misplaced. You can't just say, well, that's not my problem. That's the counselor's problem. Well, that kid still needs a teacher, so there you go.
So that brings us to leveling your classroom, right? Because we were talking about that piece of differentiated instruction and supporting
Yep.
kids where they're at. I
Right.
know, Jenny, I know you've done a lot of work with math workshops, which is a great way to level instruction, to get students to work in both homogeneous and heterogeneous groups so
Yes.
that you can support them where they're at.
Right. So I sat when California I had 300 students. And how am I going to differentiate for 300 students? That's insane, right? I mean, it just was crazy. So I started to look at differentiation, and that's kind of what led me to my math stations. Is I could put kids at stations that worked on the area that they needed. Now, this is all data-driven lessons. So this is
Right.
not I'm just pulling out the next page in the curriculum guide. No, I have pre-assessed. I have done data on these kids. I've realized where their deficits are, or what their weaks and strengthnesses are, right? We should say. And I've placed them accordingly into groups. Now, normally I would do random for thinking tasks, 100%, because every kid can contribute to a thinking task. But when you're talking about differentiation, the kid sitting next to them has a different strength and weakness than they do.
Absolutely.
So I always felt putting them in homogeneous groups by level kind of helped me as a teacher. I could work with 5 kids who all needed the same help with the same skill. And I
Right.
can zero in on those 5 while the other students are working on tasks with their peers and doing those thinking tasks. And then I would pull some aside. And the next day would alternate and I'd grab another group. So it wasn't like I was always working with just one group. So I started to realize that differentiation can be broken up into different things, right? And that's what led me to that. So yeah, the content, the process, the product, and the effect.
Awesome. Thomas Lynn's work.
Yeah. I think that was the only way to save my sanity, to be honest. Yeah, I didn't know what else
Right.
to do. And then I also started to restructure since I'm doing all this data, I then restructured how I assess them. And Peter talks about this too. What is the difference between formative and summative? And I always tell my my students and even my adult students that formative is information or data to inform the teacher how the class is doing while you're in a unit or while you're in a topic, whatever you want to call. Like, let's say you're
Right.
working on fractions with unlike denominators. Okay, I'm not going to just say fractions because fractions is a big plethora of different substandards, right? But if we're looking and we're going to zero in on one standard, this mini topic, if you want to call it, for the next 2 weeks, we're working on fractions with unlike denominator. And I give them a quiz or I give them an exit ticket or I'm doing a checking for understanding some other way. Like I'm walking by and I'm asking this, they're showing work, what have you. Okay. Whatever gives you the data you need to know if you're ready to move on is formative. All right. Like, okay, they're getting this. Let's take them up a notch. Let's level them up. In my class, I use a lot of game words or like sports words because that's kind of my background as I played sports my whole life. I'm like, all right, let's go. We're going to game day now. Game day was summative day. Bring your game. This is game day. We're going to level up. You got to show me what you got. We've been working on this. We've been practicing for this game. Here's the big game. We're down to the getting the trophy. You know, this is the win all be all, right? So Peter writes here that a formative assessment should be the focus primarily on informing students about where they are. Now that's something I'm going to tell you a lot of teachers need more work on.
Right.
Is involving the children in their own data.
Absolutely.
And I'm guilty of it too, is print out those data sheets. Why should it be a secret? You know, kids start to see themselves as I'm an A student, I'm a B student, I'm a C student, right? And so forth. Why? Why am I a C student?
Well, because
this is where you're performing. This is your weakness. Here's your strength.
Well, performance is typically a one and done, and they move on. So there's no growth, you know. And I mean, when I was teaching first grade, we would track our fluency each week, so they would see their growth, and it was so empowering for these little kids to see how they were improving because they were putting in, you know, we were doing, you know, daily skill checks so they could master all their facts, right? Because that's the first grade standard. They had we had to do it every day, and they had to see their own growth to actually believe that they were capable of doing it.
Yeah. And I think when they take ownership and they learn that I'm not competing with the kid next to me, I'm competing with myself.
Yes.
You know, this is individualized growth. Who cares if they got to level 24 faster than me? I'm growing. You know, and I think educators need to take that mindset as well as you're never done learning. And I always tell people the day I'm done learning, Patricia, I should be fired. Because as an educator,
I thought you were going to sit here in the grave for some reason.
Right? I mean, if they sit there and tell me, Jenny, you have been doing the exact same thing for the past 5 years, you're not perfecting your craft anymore as an educator, I'd be like, it's time to retire. I'm done.
Yeah,
because
we talked about that.
You put those blinders on and you just go, this is what I know and this is all I want to know and I don't want to see that way. I don't want to see that way. Time to get out of the profession, my friend.
Absolutely. Hate to say it, but it's true.
Yeah.
So let's talk about summative assessments. And I always tell my students summative assessments should help us sum up our learning, right?
It's the summary at the end. Yeah.
And where we are, it's not a dead end street. It's just where you are at this moment in time, and we can continue to grow and to progress. And thankfully, with the Common Core, you know, the standards aren't taught in isolation, right? There is that progression. The skills build on each other. So maybe this year they haven't grasped surface area, but they get to do it again next year with decimals.
Right. And here in Florida, we just adopted the BEST standards. And I went to the training for that. And I was very pleased to see that it had that same sequential progression. Like you could see that geometry starts in this grade and it continues on. So it's not hey, I'm just going to touch the surface here and then we're going to forget about it. You know, you're going to need to know this, honey, because it's going to keep popping up, you know, and we're going to make sure by the time you get to this grade, you've mastered this because learning is fluid. And that brings us to, how do we assess them, right?
Mhm.
Is that one test going to show you mastery? Or do children need time to show mastery? Not every kid learns at the same pace. Not every kid's going to learn at the pace of your pacing guide.
Right.
You know, your pacing guide may say you need to be on topic 2 by next Friday, and 50% of your class is still showing below mastery. You need to throw that pacing guide out the door, or rethink your way of bringing this in for the kids and honing it down, or find another strategy or something else, right? That formative assessment is what's guiding your lessons, right? So when you get to the summative, you can almost predict how the kids are going to do.
Absolutely.
And when you are grading and assessing and giving scores to how they're performing, that should be a good indicator of how they're going to perform on the end of the course exams or the state exams, right? So if you have an A student, they should be performing at proficient or above, right? But when you have a student who has an A and they're bottoming out on those performance exams, then that tells you that, one, either your grading scale is wrong, or your
Right.
teaching practices was not challenging enough to the rigor of that test. And so these formative and summative assessments really need to be your data that you look at and that you continue to allow students to be fluid with. So in my classroom, let's say we take a summative test. I get this kickback all the time. Well, what if they, fail? And then let them do it again. Give them a week, let them revisit the material, let them sit down with you, go over the ones that you got wrong with them, let them talk it out with you, and let them try it again. Learning is progressional. I'm going to tell you right now, as a student, I did not really care much for math. And in fact, I struggled in it. I got good grades, but I had to work my patootie off for it.
Right.
And I was always the kid who was in my teacher's tutoring sessions or walking up to them going, "Can you show me another example? I still don't get this." But there was concepts that I didn't learn until I got to college.
Hmm.
And I had a professor show me something. And I'm like, "Oh my word, are you kidding me? That now makes sense." Does that mean I shouldn't be a math teacher right now? I shouldn't be coaching math? Right? Think about that. Like, if we judge kids on the scores that they receive in their younger years of learning as a predicament of what kind of adult they're going to be or what kind
Right.
of profession they should have, learning is continual. And there's things, I'll go to conferences and they'll show me something with a manipulative, and I'm like, holy cow, I would have never thought of that.
Yeah.
We don't have all the answers, and so we can't expect these kids to have all the answers. Let them try again. And if you want to make a different test, then make a different test, whatever, that's on you.
Well, and I think the
But
whole idea of just being okay with failure, right? And
yeah,
persevering. So
right. But
that's
if you tell them that growth mindset, it's okay to make mistakes, but you're marking them wrong. You won't let them fix it.
right.
It's okay to be wrong, as long as you learn from it. Well, if they can't demonstrate that learning to you, you killed their growth mindset.
Right. And maybe, like you said, just give them another way. Like I loved your example earlier where they were creating their own videos. I mean, that's
Yeah.
such a great way to give them an alternative way to show what they know.
Right. I even had them for one particular assessment, just to piggyback on what you said, I use Flipgrid. Well,
Nice.
Flipgrid has an AR adaptability. The year it came out with the augmented reality, right? So I had students record themselves on Flipgrid. I attached the AR QR code to it, right? So the kids walked around with their cell phones, with their earbuds in, okay, because they already got them,
Yes.
might as well use them. And the kids who didn't, I would let them play theirs out loud or whatever. They would walk around and scan the QR code, and it would be one of their peers in the room going, "All right, guys, here's your problem. What is the error?"
Wow. That's
So they
higher
had to
level
look
thinking.
at that student's work and find out where they purposely made an error. And that was their error analysis. That was the assessment. Or they would go, "Okay, here's the problem. The answer is 25. Prove it.
Wow.
And that was when they scan the QR code, the video pops up automatically, right? So you're watching the student teach the video. And so as you're holding your phone, you're like, okay, and but they can do it individually. If you want it to be a true summative, if you want it to be a formative, maybe let them group together. And if they can, it's harder when you have the answer. A lot of teachers don't think that, but I even did that as a final exam one year.
Sure.
Our big end of the year final exams. The kid goes like, it always took about 5-6 minutes to the first hand went up and went, the answers are on here. I'm like, tell me how I got it.
Wow. I've never tried
and they're
that.
Like, oh, because when kids get an answer, they think it's correct. They're like, I'm done. No, it's wrong. I always love I put it in the calculator. That's what the calculator says. I'm like, honey, the calculator is only as smart as the person using it. It's going to tell you what you put in. If you put it in incorrectly, it's going to give you an incorrect answer. So giving them the answer or leaving out a step and having them go and fill in the step that you missed, makes them really learn to analyze the work. And a kid can't cheat on that.
There you go. I love that.
Can't look at the person next to them and go, cool, it's 25.
Yep.
So
great example.
Yeah.
So let's talk about report cards and reporting out. You did share that wonderful example of how kids were going around and sharing their group findings and how they solve the problem, just validating their work and what they're doing.
But I think this is really going to transition education to really start looking at moving more toward a standards-based grading system. Mm-hmm. And a true standards-based grading system. And there's so many research articles and books out there. I'm not going to do a standards-based grading PD real quick here on you, but
you have done it before.
I changed my thinking that you are truly assessing their academic growth. That's it. That's what a grade should be. It should not be how much extra credit they did. It shouldn't be if that's a kid that you love with a dear heart, because grading should not be biased. All right. I've had some kids who drove me up a wall behavior-wise, but mastered every test. Does that kid deserve a C because I don't like them? No.
Right.
You can't be emotional with grades. Grades are truly academic. Would you want your paycheck to reflect that? Let's say you have a principal who can't stand you. And they call up HR and go, you know what? Bring them down a couple notches. I don't like them.
That's a lawsuit.
That's a union issue real fast, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's how kids feel. And then they feel like my teacher doesn't like me. That's why I have a C.
Right.
I can't tell you how many kids I have every year who will sit there and they'll rat out the teachers too. They'll tell you about me.
I've heard a lot of those stories.
Yeah, and they're like,
kind of the nice thing about teaching
took
math.
30%. Yeah, she took 30% off because I was a day late. That's not academic growth.
Where she took off 20% because I didn't get my syllabus signed. That was I find that as a parent. I'm like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like your PE teachers marking you down for not having your syllabus signed. It should be based on your effort in physical education.
Right. And you also have to look at some of these kids may come from a home where they didn't see their parents.
That's right. Or they have
they come home and their parents are at work and they leave it on the counter and then they get up to go to school in the morning. The parents dead asleep and they just leave. Now, that kid's grade is affected because their parents work at nights and don't have the ability, or we have our foster youth and a lot of foster parents don't want to do that kind of stuff.
Or they have ADD and they forgot to turn it in.
Yeah. You have to bring
empathy. And then it got washed in their jeans.
Can I tell you how many times
that happened to me?
Yeah. Can I tell you how many times I would leave things on the counter and my mom would throw it in the trash? I was like, I'd go tell my teacher, can I have another permission slip to the field trip? My mom threw it in the trash. So let's talk about revolutionizing our classrooms. Let's talk about that change, Patricia. How are we going to do this? What is it going to look like in the real world? I mean, we're almost we are an hour and a half in here. Let's give some listeners some chance to understand that we need this change in our classrooms and we need it for the better, because We have a new generation of learners. And I don't know about you, but when I retire, I want the person who's making my paychecks to my retirement fund to know the difference between a decimal and where it should be placed.
There you
So
go.
I want the right paycheck. So how are we going to do that? What's our change?
Man, I think as teachers, we just got to be comfortable with taking risks and be comfortable with the uncomfortable and
Yeah.
trust. And I think a big piece is trust. I think we sometimes come in the classroom and have our own assumptions about the students and what they're capable of. And what I've read in terms of the research is that is actually the best predictor of student outcomes is our
Yeah.
beliefs in them. So
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to also recognize that I mean, I believe in many ways that as humans even animals, we discriminate, right? We make assumptions,
Mm-hmm.
we
Yep.
we judge, and so just check yourself too, and just be aware of that, like have that not just be something that's like an unconscious bias.
Right.
Be
I was just going to say that. Yep.
Yeah, be willing to just kind of to realize that
And be willing to see your own faults and be
exactly.
okay with that and learn. Like I reflect back on those early years and I'm like, oh man, I just didn't know better. I really didn't, but I've learned and I've grown from there. And I think another great way to make that change is listen to your students. Let your
Yeah,
students have a voice. Let them tell you how they like to learn. Let them tell you what they feel is important and what's not important. And I mean, there's so much more to this book. I really thoroughly enjoyed reading
I
this whole
love
book,
it.
and it gave me so many things, even as a coach, as an educator for multiple years, as a professor, things I was still learning, and things that I want to implement with my teachers in my own classrooms. And I even want to take it to the directors of the universities I work for and say, hey, look, I think this is a style we need to kind of implement for the new teachers coming into the program to prepare them for this. We can't keep teaching them to do the same old lesson plans the way that they were taught 30, 40 years ago. It's not going to fly anymore. The times have changed and we need to change with them. And I've always said if kids aren't learning with the way we teach, then we need to teach to the way they learn.
There you
And the
go.
only way you're going to know how to do that is by asking the kids. And they'll
I
tell
love
you,
that.
kindergarten to seniors, they will tell you straight up, I don't like taking notes. Why? I find it boring. All right, scrap it. Let's go.
Yes, I did
What
an
can we
end
do
of
in
the
what can
year
we do in replace of that?
exactly, and I did an end of the year reflection with my kids, like asking them
Every
what they
year.
like, and I was like,
Yep.
"Dang, I should have asked this. I should have given this throughout, you know, throughout every quarter almost." So it's
Yeah.
like, be more like a stockholder, right? And
Yeah.
ask your student
Constituents. Yeah. Yep.
constituents like what's working,
Yeah.
what do they love, like, and then do more of that and
Yeah.
do more observation, do less judging and more observing. I think
Yeah.
too, I know myself, I tend to focus sometimes more on the negative,
Right.
what one person's not doing or what one person's, instead of
Or
focusing.
that one kid who won't pick up a pencil.
Right.
Don't let all your energy go to that one kid. That one child will come around when they want to. But you got 40 other kids in the room, let's say, that need you now. And all your attention's working on that one kid because they're just doing something you don't approve of. And I'm actually presenting for Google Camp next week. And my whole presentation's on project-based learning.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, it's something you and I
Love it.
talk about in our classes at the university level. And I'm excited to talk about that because that was one of my reflection questions. Was every year I give the kids a survey on the course. Every year I give a survey on what can Miss G do better. And kids will tell you. And some are harsh,
Yes,
and some are sweet and loving. And you have to roll with the punches, but never ask a question you don't want to hear the answer to.
there you go.
So you gotta frame it that way. But a lot of kids said, I want to do more projects that involve me building or thinking or creating versus giving me the first 10 problems on the page 96.
Oh, nice. Well,
So
that's great.
I was like, all right. So I started to change my thinking. I started to look up PBL, and we started working on it in the university level of trying to get the teachers to think that way as well. And so I'll be presenting at Google Camp for that one next week. And that all came from a survey. So ask those kids, what can I change? And I like how you mentioned, I wish I would have given one in December, because sometimes when you give it at the end of the year, then you're like, oh, well, that's what this class wanted. But, you know, it's kind of
Right.
like getting those test scores back, and you're like, okay, great. My class last year didn't do that well, or they did great, but that's not a real good predictor of how my next class is going to do. I mean, because you get different kids, you get different learning
Absolutely.
styles, you know. So sometimes I wish we got more data in the middle of the year so we had time to change things too.
Exactly. Love
So
it. Passion
I
led us
think
here.
I think that is 100%. If you are in this profession and you love this profession, it's because you have a passion for working with these kids and serving these kids and seeing them learn and grow. And it all comes down to passion. When people ask me all the time, like, oh my gosh, how do you teach math in high school? Aren't they this? Aren't they that? I'm like, I love it. You know,
I
and they
love
look
you.
at me like, you're crazy. I'm not invited to many dinner parties anymore, but
There you go.
they're like, that lady's weird. Don't invite her to
Crazy,
the party. Talk about math. She gonna make us do math problems. Don't invite her.
right? I know every time I go out to dinner with friends, they all hand me the check.
Oh, I know, and they expect you to do it in your head too. You're like, what's the tip? Uh, like you're a human calculator. So
So we didn't get to talk about this, but kind of the big ideas is always begin, just to highlight if you do one thing next year, it's always begin your instruction with a problem. Again, that first 3 to 5 minutes, that's how you get your audience. And this is a great example, but there's many more of these kinds of problems. Here's another example. They're thinking problems that get our kids to think. They can be visual. They can
yep.
be, us drawing on the board as we talk about the problem. They can be concrete manipulatives. They can be, just engaging or even student created. So if you want to check out some more math tasks, here is a link to my webpage. You just want to look at the Google Sheet. There's assessment tools. There's virtual manipulatives. I've categorized all of these math tools that I've acquired or, found throughout the years. And you want to go down on the Google Sheet to math tasks. You're going to find all of those math tasks like Enrich and Illustrative Math, and so many more. Tons of
Yeah.
YouTube videos.
You have some amazing stuff on there. I'd also recommend, if you don't find what you want there, because she's got so much that you just can't filter through it all, because they're all so wonderful. But you also have Robert Kaplinsky, Dan
Yeah.
Meyer, 3X Math, whole bunch out there that are just phenomenal and free, because we're all about the
Exactly.
free.
San Francisco Unified School District has their math curriculum online
They
too.
do.
You can
That's a
see
good
their
one.
math tasks, which are phenomenal, and they're arranged by grade level span.
And check out her YouTube video link, because that's where all of Patricia's YouTube videos are. You'll find our other video on there as well.
Yes, the
And
math
maybe some more
workshop.
coming up here soon.
More to come, more to come. And we'd love to join you, and we'd love to meet with you all virtually or book a session with us. We could talk more about any of either thinking tasks or problem solving or
Yeah, get
math
a group of your
workshop.
peeps together and we can Zoom talk with you and kind of answer personalized questions as well.
And join our Facebook group. It is Facebook Math Connects. We'd love to see you there. So thanks so much for joining us this evening, and thanks for asking your great questions too.
All
Have a great
right.
night.
Have a great night, guys.